I think everything is going.
Is the audio working?
One more time. Okay. It's all good. Let me get in. Da-da. Oh my God. Yeah, looks okay.
You want me to buy one for here so you don't have to keep bringing that over?
Jesus Christ. Good God.
Dude, maybe you could turn that off right now.
Yeah, I wanted it to fill a little bit. It's okay. Okay.
All right. I always feel so nervous before I start. It's not. It doesn't really feel like something that I could get familiar with. Okay. Hi everyone, and welcome back. It's been a little bit of time since my last episode, but here we are. We are on the war prayer. The war prayer. This is my first official show that I have not watched previously. So it's actually really quite exciting for me since I've been told that this is where episodes start becoming more heavy and interesting. Well, it's a weird way of saying like I enjoyed watching the episode. That sounds really strange, considering like what the topic of the episode was. But the fact is, I'm really happy that I made it this far, and I'm still kind of continuing on, and I'm enjoying it so far. So in the war prayer, what resonated for me were the themes of regret, racism, and change, or at least a hope for change. And it also felt like it was about the war of like one's internal struggles as well as the external ones that we face in our society and our world. And the prayer, I assume, or how I took it, was that it was a hope for something different and something better. So the first theme in the war prayer that really resonated for me, and which is an obvious theme, is the idea of regret. And when we think about regret is a sense of this deep disappointment. And having made decisions that had an outcome that you didn't expect or that wasn't quite favorable. So then you end up having the sense of regret. And depending on how significant that outcome is, or how intense it is, the sense of regret could be pretty deep as well. Regret. Okay. To start off, my aunt, who I thought that Dylan kept saying my aunt. So then I had to turn on the subtitles. My aunt. I didn't know Dylan had an aunt and that she was visiting. Okay. She asked her, "Do you regret the choices that you made to be here?" Dylan says sometimes and only sometimes. And my aunt responds, "I would be nothing other than what I am."
Remember it. I thought you might. Life's very simpler then.
Do you regret the choices that you made to be here?
Sometimes. Only sometimes. You?
I would be nothing other than what I am.
I often hear people say that because one, we are the outcome of all the decisions and choices we've made in our life and what we learn and don't learn from it. And ultimately, that shapes who we are. So yeah, we are exactly who we are at the present time because of the decisions we've made and the consequences we face and the outcomes we've endured. But sometimes, reflecting back on like the things I've done, I often think, couldn't I have gotten to the same place in a different way by making different choices that wasn't so hard or much of a struggle or had such negative consequences? And that's hard. That's really hard to get to because, for someone who's lived in a kind of lifestyle, and for anyone else this is relevant too, if you've lived a lifestyle that wasn't quite, quote unquote normal, where you've been met with like struggles that were outside of like the range of what would be considered normal, or situations where you faced trauma or tragedy or experiences that are very unique to you, then I think you lose sight of, you don't lose sight, you just really don't have a sense of a frame of reference. And when you don't have a sense of frame of reference, it's kind of easy to make the same mistakes over and over again that end up leading to regret. Because you can't really trust your gut during those situations. You can't, it's not reliable enough. And then sometimes you kind of try to trust your gut and it still may not be correct because your gut doesn't even know what's healthy or what's not healthy, or what may be good for you or what may not be good for you. So I know for a fact that, reflecting on the topic of regret, which I know I've only said I regretted things. I haven't really taken the time to analyze it in a very long time. And what I've realized, just thinking about this, is for the longest time I did say to myself, I'm exactly who I am now because of the mistakes I've made. And it's a great way to sort of be able to say this to yourself in order to move forward. Because, am I proud of who I am right now? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Compared to who I used to be, some many years ago, even 10 years ago, I wasn't very happy with the kind of person I was back then. But could I be a better person? Sure, absolutely. 100%. There's so much room for growth for me. And that's certainly what I'm striving for. Could I have gotten a little bit further had I made different choices? Sure, absolutely. I think so. I know that we can't wallow in that for a long time. I know I can't, because there was some period of my life where I spent regretting the decisions I've made. And that ended up actually being counterproductive. So the time I spent regretting the decisions I've made because the outcome wasn't favorable or I've suffered some sort of consequence, I ended up in a state of feeling depressed. And that time was lost, essentially. Whereas I could have, if I was in a better state of mind, or let's say I understood things a little bit differently, I probably could have used that time to push myself a little bit further. But, wallowing in a sense of regret is also feeling as if you need to punish yourself too. So then you keep yourself in this place of punishing yourself, and it becomes your own prison. And that's exactly what it felt like to me, that it was the self-punishment, that if I stayed in a state of regret, then I could continue to punish myself some more and not allow myself to move forward. Because you know what? I deserve to punish myself for the mistakes I've made. I deserve to do this to myself and not be positive and not be happy. And that's probably the most self-destructive thing that you can do to yourself. At least it's something that I realized that I ended up doing, but that was after much time had gone by. So now fast forward, it's like I could say, yeah, sure. I would be nothing other than what I am now. Could I have gotten to this place a little differently? Yeah. But after having sat through that and thought about it for a long time, I think the more important thing now, going forward, is to not spend too much time on the mistakes I've made and regretting those mistakes. Because the outcome of that is then what? It's exactly as what Londo's father has said. That his shoes are too tight and he's forgotten how to dance.
My shoes are too tight.
Excuse me?
Something my father said. He was old, very old at the time. I went into his room and he was sitting alone in the dark, crying. So I asked him what was wrong, and he said, my shoes are too tight, but it doesn't matter because I have forgotten how to dance. I never understood what that meant until now. My shoes are too tight, and I have forgotten how to dance.
I don't understand.
Nor should you.
I remember, and I know that in the state of mind that I was, wallowing in the period of regret, I've forgotten how to move forward. It becomes so stifling and debilitating that you forget to move forward. You forget that there's so much more out there, and that time just keeps ticking because you get stuck in that one spot, that one place. And that's actually what loss does to you too. When you feel like you've lost something, you feel stuck in that period of time and you really don't know how to move forward. And you forget how to dance. And then you say to yourself, it doesn't really matter anyway because your shoes don't fit. Yeah, that's exactly kind of like, if I were to put all this together, that's exactly how it felt for me then. I think this episode in this topic, what it really did for me was enhance the fact that, or reminded me of the fact that, if I do make mistakes, I can't stay in that mistake for too long because I have a tendency to do a lot of self-punishing, to be really disappointed at myself and not allowing myself to have more positive experiences, which again, like I said, is so what's the word I used earlier? Counter-effective, I said counterintuitive, but it's so...
Counter-effective.
Yeah, counter-effective, yeah.
Counterproductive.
Yes, it's counterproductive. Yes, that's the word. It's so counterproductive because you just, you want to be able to continue becoming a better person and moving forward, and you need that positivity to get to where you want to get to. And yeah. So I will try to remember this. I spend a little less time putting myself in prison and going out there and learning how to live. All right. So Arya and Kiran, the two lovebirds that have escaped Centauri Prime. It is Centauri Prime, right? Their country, their planet.
Their planet.
Their
Not a country, it is a whole planet.
Listen, I learned about like geography and stuff like that by playing Civ 6, Civ 5 and 6, okay? And then like I realized that's how like evolution took place, okay?
So sad. Don't admit this.
I'm gonna admit it all, I don't care. Video games taught me a lot.
They did.
By playing Plague, that's how I understood how viruses even work too. So I'm not going to deny that, okay? I love it. I am to marry the ugliest woman on Centauri Prime, and Arya is to marry a man old enough to be her grandfather. And then Londo says, ugly and old? But I don't see the problem.
Their families arranged marriages for them. They fled here.
Yes, but why?
I am to marry the ugliest woman on Centauri Prime. And Arya is betrothed to a man who's old enough to be her grandfather.
Ugly and old, yes? Then their families must be both rich and powerful. I commend your parents on fine choices, but I still don't see the problem.
We don't want to marry anyone else.
We want to marry each other. We love each other.
Love? What does love have to do with marriage?
This was the story of my life at one period of time. And the moment I heard this, now I can laugh about it, although it was a sense of great distress for me at the time. So during my college years, I met a man who was 12 years older than me. He was old. Older. He was 12 years older than me. And he was just completing med school. He was in his last year of med school. And I told my mom about him. Now, mind you, my mom also has an age difference between my dad and her of 13 years, and I don't really think that there was love there either. But at the time, I believe, okay.
I mean, I know what you're about to get into, but you don't have to give so much detail if you don't want to. But I don't think.
No, okay. All right, let me start over.
Okay.
So at the time, I was dating a guy who was 12 years older than me, and he was a lot older, and he was just about to finish med school. I was in a very long distance relationship with him for a few years. No, for a couple of years. And it got to a point where I just decided that this wasn't going to work. And, the more I got to know him in this sort of long distance relationship, there was really not much I had in common. And so I told my mom, I am going to break up with this person. It's not working for me. Her exact words were, wait, I actually did tell her I don't love him. And her exact words to me were, love doesn't feed you, clothe you, or shelter you. And she told me that this was a bad decision and that I needed to marry this person. How awful is that? Huh, Londo?
What did your mom think was so valuable about him? And why was that important to her?
Mm-hmm. So, here's me in college at the time. All right, first, let me just backtrack a little. We grew up very poor. Very, very poor. And now here's me in college at the time where my mom and I didn't know where I was in which direction I was going to be headed for my future. When I first met him, I was still struggling to figure out what my major was. So I didn't even know. I mean, at some point, my mom just said to me, well, why don't you just become an English teacher? Because, like, what is there? You know, like, at the time, like, there wasn't, like, a lot I understood about the world. So going through the list of majors it had, like, really no meaning for me. Because I didn't know what you can do with it outside of just majoring in it. That was a huge issue. So at the time, I didn't even know what direction I was going to take. So my mom sees this guy who has a potential who is going to be a doctor. And she sees this potential of me being able to live a comfortable life with someone who is going to make a 6-figure income. Despite the fact that he was 12 years older, and despite the fact that his personality was that of a narcissist, she overlooked all of that and felt that the more important thing was survival. There's a reason for that. My mom and my father have an age gap of 13 years. My father is very special. I'm just going to put it that way. My father didn't really have much, and he was an alcoholic. The one thing he had going for him at the time was that he had a sister living in America. And while you're living in, like, Korea in the 1970s, anything outside of Korea seems like a better option. So my mom trusted in that, and she followed my father all the way from Korea to America, despite the fact that he really had no potential, only because the idea of living in America had this sort of false promise that it was going to be better than where she was in Korea at the time. So given her own life story, and how she struggled and how our family struggled after we got here, she didn't want to see the same thing for myself. For the longest time, I resented her, though, because she really made me feel guilty about breaking up with him. And because of that, the relationship lasted a little bit longer than I really wanted it to, until it got to a point where it just really became detrimental to me, to both of us. It became very unhealthy. But at the time, I, absolutely resented my mom for forcing me into staying in this relationship for longer than I should have. Because I stayed in that relationship a little bit longer, in this long distance relationship a little longer, I missed out on other opportunities as well. And at the time, a lot of opportunities were growing for me. But then some things happened, and I ended up not taking those opportunities and not having different experiences and ending up in a state of depression. And I say my mom forced me to stay because there was a lot of manipulative aspects to that. Sure. So watching this episode and seeing Londo say this, now I chuckled. I absolutely chuckled hearing that. And here he is talking about his 3 wives, right? Pestilence, famine, and death.
But they love each other.
Love. Pah! Overrated. Here, look. These are my 3 wives. Pestilence, famine, and death. Do you think I married them for their personalities? Their personalities could shatter entire planets. Arranged marriages, every one. But they worked out. They inspired me. Knowing that they were waiting at home for me is what keeps me here, 75 light years away.
You bastard. You tell Arya and Kieran that like love has nothing to do with marriage, right? And then you have this relationship and this fling with that other Centauri chick, right? And you tell her you love her, and you're like really happy.
Adira, yeah.
Yeah, dear, and you give her like starlings, and you have like the best time of your life in that short period of time. And then you tell these two lovebirds that they shouldn't have that same experience.
I will interject here and say that this is one of the problems with guest writers, right? Who come in and write episodes that are kind of standalone.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, I don't want to say that I don't think they watched the episodes that came before it, but it's like, that was weird that Londo would have that response after we had seen the whole episode.
Yeah.
About how he was very much about being in love, right? So I did think that was strange, but I think that's one of the things that happens when you have another writer come in and just, write.
Well, it certainly made him seem like a hypocrite.
Right.
And he even told Adira in episodes previously that it's okay, that this isn't his first rodeo, basically, that he has loved before. But you have like 3 wives that you're keeping like so far away.
Yeah, it's a weird, drastic change from what we learned about his very romantic side. I think that was kind of a disservice to turn him into that character for the sake of, that episode. But yeah.
The thing for me that was so important, though, hearing that line, the fact that I laughed at it, told me that I've come so much further than where I was back then, because that was a huge source of pain and hurt for me.
Trigger, I feel, for you. When I met you 10 years ago, I think if you had seen that episode, that would have triggered you to rage. I want to say
I would have
made you
raged.
so angry.
If I would have heard this 10 years ago, I would have raged. I would have been really extremely mad. I would have wanted for Adira and Arya and Kieran the best lives for them, because after all, it is love that feeds you. It is love that shelters you. And it is love that gives you dreams and goals of wanting to have this beautiful life. It fuels your desire to live. It fuels your desire to heal. And of course, it fuels your desire to dance. So Adira and Kieran, God bless you guys. You guys actually are getting the life you want. And I'm really glad that Londo saw it differently.
Can you appreciate the perspective that Londo gave, though, now, of what it means to come from that kind of, is born to the purple limitation,
Absolutely.
right? And what that means, and that there's a certain honor in that, and that it's tradition.
My dear, beautiful children, consider for a moment what you are doing. For 1,000 years, marriages have been arranged among our people. Marriages which meld the noble houses together and keep the fabric of the republic strong. Sometimes these marriages call for sacrifice. Great sacrifice. But we make this sacrifice because this is what it means to be Centauri. If you deny this tradition, you lose the very thing which makes you what you are. Do you understand?
But it's so unfair.
Especially as far as, how you've come to understand your mother after all this time. And you have less anger and more understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've mentioned previously, Born in a Purple, when I first watched it and analyzed it 10 years ago, was a significant turning point for me to begin to understand my parents with a deeper level of understanding, to see them differently, to understand things differently, and know that they are the product of their circumstances. And that's not something that they could have ever changed. And they don't even have the insight to be able to see that because of their lack of education, lack of experiences, and awareness of how things should work. I don't even know if my mom really understands the concept of love, because she's always been in the state of survival. And once again, here we are with Londo saying this. And yeah, like that line, what does love have anything to do with marriage? I probably would have like thrown my laptop at that moment, across. I watched this episode at Starbucks. Probably would have like thrown my laptop across the store,
10 years ago? Yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah, you would.
The moment I heard it though, I laughed so hard because, it's a different way of seeing marriage. I mean, obviously, throughout history, we know that marriage is about survival. It had been for a very long time. In every civilization, it was about power and nobility, which is essentially survival, the best kind of survival. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm very happy that in this episode, Londo came to his senses. And it was nice. It was a nice way for even me to like personally hear him say that. Like his outcome where he says, that he sits there and he realizes that he too is wearing shoes that are too tight for him. And that was a nice, honestly, I felt like that was a nice closure for me personally, to hear something like that from him, where my mom wouldn't have had that level of sophistication to be able to articulate that. So for me, that was actually a nice piece of closure for that chapter of my life. So that was very nice. You know what was actually also really beautiful? Mm-hmm. So after that monologue that Londo gives to Veer about how his shoes are tight, mm-hmm. he looks at Veer, because Veer says, "I don't understand." He looks at Veer and he gives him this warm, genuine smile. And that smile on Londo was so beautiful to me. It left a mental image of him for me that was just really lovely. And I have to give Veer a lot of credit. He stands up to Londo and says, "You were wrong. Mm-hmm. You were wrong to have done this." I really give a lot of credit to Veer for standing up to Londo, even though Londo is considered, his ambassador, and like he looks up to him, but he wasn't afraid to speak his mind.
Yes, what do you want?
To tell you something.
Well?
You were wrong.
What?
My cousin and Arya wanted to be together because they love each other. Now, would that have destroyed the great Centauri Republic?
We cannot turn our back on tradition.
Oh, damn tradition! Kieran may die because our glorious tradition values wealth and power over love.
regardless of what consequences there may have been. But he did that, and I commend him for that too, for being a true
Ally.
Yeah, that's a great word, for being a true ally and a friend to Lando. That was great. Racism. All right. What was that guy's name again? I already forgot.
Who? What guy?
The jerk.
Oh, Ivanova's ex-boyfriend?
Yeah, what was his name?
I don't know.
Malcolm. All right. Malcolm. The concept of racism, right? In social psychology, there are many theories and explanations as to why racism and prejudice and discrimination happens.
I'm just gonna laugh.
You can laugh. You can laugh. In social psychology, there are theories of why prejudice and discrimination happen. There's something called, there's something called realistic conflict theory. And that's when, resources are scarce and everyone's in competition for resources that are, let's say, not very abundant. So when that happens, the people who are not considered, let me cheat a little bit. Okay, that's really basically all I wrote. Yeah, so when resources are scarce, you tend to discriminate against other groups because you don't want them having any of these scarce resources. Another theory is dehumanization. That's when you look at, there are in-groups and out-groups. You see your own in-group favorably and as human. And anyone who's not part of your in-group, all those people, of different races that are in the out-group, they're the ones who are seen as not human.
I can't believe you did this to me, Susan. What kind of a human are you? Decide. Then.
I found many of these people to be more human than you and your kind. But I don't suppose you'd understand that.
I don't know you anymore.
I never knew you.
And that's part of seeing different outgroups as not human. But I'm glad that Ivana brought that back together and, and basically said that they have more human qualities. Because people of in-group, when they dehumanize people of out-groups, they even believe that they don't even have the kind of emotional capacity that their own in-group people have. That they have those primary emotions, but that they lack the secondary emotions. Mm-hmm. So it was a really nice way for Ivanova to have piece that together at the end to give that closure, to say, you know what, they're even more human than the very person who says that they're not. And then another explanation for discrimination is the authoritarian personality theory. Malcolm has this authoritarian personality theory. They are ones who are incredibly inflexible. They conform to, they conform to their higher belief, which is Earth, right? Their own authority. And they have extremely rigid rule sets that anything outside of that cannot be possible. They are extremely conventional thinkers. And that is Malcolm. That is Malcolm. With that said, what is there more to say? Racism sucks. With that said, it's you know, racism, discrimination, and prejudice is there's so much to be said on this topic, and different people have different ideas about it. For the most part, we would say that discrimination is learned, that we learn discrimination at an early age from our upbringing. It's based on learning theory. That as a child, if you were taught by your parents or your teacher or any other, you know, surrounding that you need to discriminate against certain outgroups, then you learn that that's the kind of mentality you need to have. That everyone outside of your own race is seen as non-human. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's basically, you know, the majority of discrimination, right? You know, like, for example, discrimination against the LGBTQ groups. That's also taught. It's learned. Now, can we unlearn it? Sure. If we have the capacity to think outside of that, to be more accepting and understanding, to embrace that humanity is still humanity, no matter what. But it's interesting, right? Because you can't just change overnight either, unless you put a conscious effort in, or something really significant happens to you. Like if your own life was saved by someone who was different from who you are. I mean, could you imagine like someone holding on to like anger after someone from a different race that you initially had all this racism and bias for ends up saving your life? You start to look at things very differently, right?
I suppose it depends on your beliefs.
It depends on your beliefs, but I think for a lot of people, it's a turning point for being where your belief is then challenged. It's like, oh, I didn't think that person would have done that for me, because I wouldn't have done it for them. Which is why I think this is called a war prayer. When I think about prayer, I think about like the sense of eternal hope, that it's something ongoing and something that someone hopes and wishes for and dreams of, and you just keep hoping and keep wishing and keep dreaming for something that you articulate in your prayer. And I think this is just exactly that. It is a prayer for something. Who wrote this episode? Was it JMS?
No.
Okay.
It was a woman.
Okay. But I think the idea of a prayer is, you know, something about like wanting something different and eternally wishing for it and hoping for it until your prayers become answered. But the condition is until. Yeah. So, the war prayer, I mean, as I initially said, this concept of prayer is also about like your own prayer too, right? Your own internal mind regret prayer. That's also incorporated in this as well. How I understood the title of it.
It's an interesting pair of words to put together.
Mm-hmm.
Too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you wouldn't. There's a conflict, but also a hopefulness to it.
Yeah. So, Jakar,
Commander Sinclair, I have just been informed of the latest atrocity committed by your people.
My people did not attack Shal Mayan. But rest assured, whoever did will be found and punished to the full extent of the law.
I have no special love for the Minbari or their poets, but I warn you, Commander, if any Narn is harmed in this manner, there will be bloody retribution.
And I warn you, Ambassador, any disruption of Babylon 5 will be dealt with, even if I have to throw the entire Narn population into the brig. Now, if you'll excuse me.
I mean, that's typically the sentiment of people who are protective of their own in-group. And it's unfortunate because in the last episode, Jakar was this, he left that episode with this amazing, just beautiful words. And I thought, and I thought that like...
Yeah. I hate those standalones because they don't make any sense.
And I get it. I get it. But here's what I got out of it though, which is that like, the last episode, he had this beautiful monologue and it was so evolved and full of wisdom and he saved Catherine's life just because, right? And then in this episode, he's basically saying, I don't care about other people getting hurt as long as it's not the Narns, right? But I think though, it doesn't really seem like it fits his, the personality that he was showing and his belief system that where he was headed towards, from like the last episode. But, I think the way I saw it was this, that we are always in a continual place of becoming better. So we will have, like I myself, I have these moments of wisdom and then I have these moments of foolishness. And I think keeping that in mind is just really important. And knowing that that's, you take the good and you work on the bad and you just keep pushing forward. But yeah, it was really strange for Jakar to have said that. But that is also an element of how people think. This is a strength I see in Commander Sinclair because this is a weakness for me. So Sinclair is willing to play any role he needs to play for the greater good, even if it means being misunderstood. I have such an issue with being misunderstood, or if the truth is not told the way it is not told the way. Wait. Or if the truth is not told according to the truth.
You mean when he's pretending to be the xenocentric
So, yeah.
Okay.
So Commander Sinclair takes on the role of pretending to be xenocentric, and authoritarian, in with their pro-earthers. Mm-hmm. So then he could get in with Malcolm and his crew. But he can do it so openly, right? Including like offending the other alien, which I don't know her name, who almost got shot, and even being misunderstood in front of Delenn.
Right.
Delenn, who, well, she regards him very highly.
Commander Sinclair. May I introduce Mila Shah, head of the agricultural delegation from Abafor.
We look forward to studying your hydroponic cultivation methods, Commander. I understand they've been most successful.
They should be. The best technos from Earth set up the system for us. It's state of the art.
I trust your security is equally as efficient?
Absolutely.
We understand there have been several attacks on non-humans lately. Naturally, I'm concerned about the welfare of our delegates.
Don't be. We have everything under control.
But wasn't a Centauri youth seriously injured just last night?
He'll recover.
And you would think that that's like the last person you want to show any misunderstanding to, but he does it because in the end he has his one goal in mind, which is a greater good. Now this is something that I need to work on. And I think this is because like my own upbringing and everything, like where being misunderstood is something that I just really hated. A lot of people made a lot of assumptions about me growing up. And it wasn't pleasant because there were not very good assumptions about me, only because I was, you know, different, because I was Asian, or because I was poor, or because my parents owned a fish market. It was just one after another, like just a lot of things where people just made a lot of assumptions about me, and it really drove me nuts. But Commander Sinclair sees this higher goal in mind, and he's willing to do what it takes for him to get there in order to do what's right.
The greater good. So what is it about that that resonates with you specifically?
It's the idea that like he can take on this role, because this isn't the first time.
Right.
He could take on this role even if other people didn't know his intent. He could take on the role that he needs to in order to solve a bigger problem.
So you mean he doesn't fear being misunderstood?
He doesn't fear being misunderstood.
But you do.
But I do. This is one of the reasons why one of my favorite anime is Code Geass. So if you guys don't know what that anime is, check it out. That's absolutely one of my favorites. I have two favorite animes. That's my
second favorite.
Second favorite. I won't tell you what the first one is.
I know what it is.
You know, in order to do that, right? In order to be in that place, that place is lonely. I would say that, like, I mean, he has his greater good in mind, right? Like, and he's able to take on that role, and like when no one even knows about it, it's a very lonely goal and journey that you take while being misunderstood, which is even worse, in my opinion. But he's able to do that, and I see that as such strength. And that's someone who's, in that aspect, evolved. But I don't really think that Commander Sinclair really cares how people see him anyway.
I think he knows that people know him well enough. And I think that that is definitely something that you have an issue with, because people don't know you well because you don't give them a chance to know you well. So anything that you do could easily be misinterpreted or, you know, taken out of context or taken wrongly, because people don't know you well enough to know, oh, this is just, you know, Jenny being this, or this is just whatever, or Jenny's having a
That's
bad
also
day,
very true.
right? So I think you can do things like that when you have no fear that people are going to know your character. You know, that they're going to accept that this can't possibly be you. Or if it is, there are some circumstances that are causing it, right? The ability to be understood by the people who know you the best. And I think that that's hard for you because there are not a lot of people that know you the best.
But even in Code Geass, they didn't know him. They didn't know his intent.
Right, but he couldn't let them know.
He couldn't, right. So my point, though, right, is that even in the earlier episodes, right, where Sinclair does things, people didn't really know him well enough then. People know him better now. And I think even like when Delenn like looked at him a little strangely after that, in that moment, I had a feeling that she knew that I had a feeling that she knew.
Kind of like, what the?
Yeah, it seemed out of character, but I had a feeling that she knew that that was out of character for him, but for a reason. Because previously she would have made a comment. This time she didn't. She just let it go. I'd like to develop more of that. work on more of that and having more confidence in myself in that manner.
The confidence to be able to play a role, or the confidence that people are going to know that you're playing a role?
Both. But more, regardless of whether or not people knew me, like, my biggest focus is that I want it to be understood, right? And I think in some ways it's like I ask myself, why is that so important for me, for people to understand me, right? Mm-hmm. And it's because people haven't really understood me for a very long time. And I've also been surrounded by a lot of people who don't really have good awareness and insight, like growing up, right, especially. And that was really hard because you had to spell out every little thing to people who really didn't understand things or realize things, because their lack of awareness was so great. Mm-hmm. I was surrounded by a lot of people who really didn't even know themselves. So, but at this point though, I've grown into myself a lot more, and I'm not sure if I really feel the need to be understood as much as I once used to, because now I know myself a little better and I have even more just basically confidence in myself, and that should be more than enough. So we'll see. I mean, it's something that I had been aware of for quite some time. And I think it's something that I am becoming feeling like less and less I care about, whether or not someone understands me or not. I don't know if it's because I've gotten older. I'm just tired. It's too tedious.
There is that.
But yeah, I think it's important though, just, not feeling like I need to have credit all the time either. And that's also another big thing too, because I was always taking credit away from.
What?
When I was younger.
People took credit from you?
Okay.
English. Just explain in Korean. I'll translate.
I don't even know if I could say that in Korean. God, I'm a mess.
People were taking credit away from you growing up?
Or just not giving me credit for the things, that I've done. But both, so, I mean, that's probably the reason why I fought tooth and nail to get to where I got to without trying to get the help of anyone else. I did it basically all on my own for the most part. So anyway, Commander Sinclair, I mean, that's an ability I'd like to develop more. Feeling like as if I don't really need to be understood by everyone. And all the time. And having more confidence in myself and knowing that what I do is important to me. But also, sometimes that happens because, like when you have self-doubt, that doesn't help either. But that's something I'd like to continue working towards. I like seeing Commander, Sinclair be that way, and just very, he's very passionate about it. It doesn't really matter to him what other people think. What matters to him is the outcome.
The bigger picture, always, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're not big on the bigger picture. It's hard for you.
No, I'm very, I can be very emotional, and in the moment make split-second decisions based on my emotions, and it takes a little bit for me to see things with my thoughts.
You're having a great communication day today. I don't even know what that means. It takes me a while to see things with my thoughts. Okay.
It takes me a while to like really process things cognitively and intelligently, and less with my emotional mind. Mm-hmm. This is a question from Mike. Mike, thank you so much for being such a fan of, you know, my show, or this show, or whatever show this is. What are we even doing?
This project?
Oh, yes, B5. Thank you so much for taking such a great interest in this B5 project. And I saw, well, actually, Elaine told me that you had a question for me, and I will try to do my best to answer this. The first thought that comes to mind for me is that, yeah, there are a lot of people who have lived through traumatic events, and because they're with trauma, there also is a dissociative element to it that some people do experience, and they can't really recall these memories. And that actually serves as a protective mechanism, because if they were to actually remember this memory, they probably would have not been able to endure the trauma and still be where they are, where they're actually still functional. I haven't really I haven't really done a lot of therapy, but from what I know of those who do work with trauma survivors, clinicians who do work with trauma survivors, it is already a very difficult job to hear the stories of other people's traumas. It is intense, it is heartbreaking, and a lot of the time, some clinicians also do experience that the client's pain, even viscerally, as they hear their stories. Now, if I was a telepath and I were to hear the traumas or even know of the traumas that the person in front of me couldn't even articulate, I think, one, that would be extremely difficult for me to experience their trauma and have that come flooding into my own neural networks and experience it emotionally. And if I had this knowledge, but they didn't, I wonder though then how intrusive they may even feel that I'm aware of something that they don't even know about. One of the most healing and effective things about trauma work is when clients are able to piece together their own memories and process it in their own way. And their memories may not even be accurate, but it's the way they process it, they perceive it, and they come to terms with it and resolve it and understand it in the end is what's more important. Not so much the accuracy of it, of the events, but the perception of it, the experience of it, and how they come to terms with it. So sometimes, even in trauma work, you don't even need to know all the details of what transpired. It's really about like how it affected them and how it keeps them stuck in their lives and causes them distress that can be addressed. But as a provider, I'm not sure that I would want to be a telepath in that. I'm not sure if I would be able to handle that, just as Talia has a hard time handling all that noise and hearing other people's thoughts constantly. I don't know if I would want to hear someone else's trauma over and over and over again, and they don't even know it.
How would you even begin to help them? Like, yes, you experience what they, have locked away, but then what do you do with that? Like, how would you then help them with it? Like, what do you do with that information once you have it? And how does that become therapy, or how can you?
Oh, if I was a telepath and I had their memories?
Yeah, like how would you even make that into something that could be used to help the person? Like, because then you're just telling them or feeding them,
Right. So if they don't have these memories, right? Oftentimes, right, when you do therapy, you have like people give you tidbits of information, and part of that job is to, as an investigator, right, or as a puzzle solver, you piece together little bits of information in their timeline, and to develop like moments of their life, and then to help them piece it all together, because sometimes their stories are fragmented, or sometimes the way they think about things may not be congruent to what they experience, emotionally. And it's about piecing those things together to create a more whole story, and then helping them understand, where their thoughts may not be congruent, or where, where they may be stuck at, and you help them process it. Now, if I knew, so when you gather those pieces of information, you can help them make those connections by asking questions to bridge it. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you're helping them make those connections with the pieces of information you've already put together in your own head.
Sort of leading them. Well, not leading, that's a bad word to use.
Yeah, it's you just ask the questions, because you don't know and they have to be it's like Socratic questioning. Mm. You're not quite leading them, but you're asking these questions that are non-leading, but you're asking these questions so then they could think about the answer. And oftentimes when you ask them certain questions, they're like, oh my God, I never even thought of that before, because they come to those conclusions on their own. But yeah, they're just, it's like circular questioning, like, oh, well, you said this, but then, previously you said this, like, for example, is there a disconnect there? Or, what do you think about that? Is there a disconnect there? I mean, but yeah, you could just simply ask, what do you make of that?
Right.
They're very, they're questions to have the person really analyze the things that they've verbally articulated to you, and you're just giving it right back. Mm. And I think part of therapy that's really helpful too is that they get to hear what they say. It's not often that they could talk to other people about their struggles. So they don't really hear what they say, and us being a sounding board for them too. Mm. So I'm not sure if I would want to do that, be a telepath for trauma survivors, because that would be a little too intense. The other question about, possibly being a telepath for people with dementia and Alzheimer's, now that may be a little bit of a different story, just a little, but that's also considering that you're not looking at the other aspects of their life too. Now, dementia is, with dementia, what I find is that the people who experience the most pain are the loved ones. Like, for example, a married couple and their husband or wife develops dementia, and what's supposed to be the golden years of their lives, where after they retire, their plan is to go on a cruise, see the world, and enjoy time with their grandkids. But that's met with a partner who can't even remember their name. That's extremely heartbreaking. I think one of the things about dementia, though, is that at least, you know, dementia in terms of like in the form of Alzheimer's, where it's like progressive and it takes years for it to, you know, progressively get worse, is that you have time in between to have important conversations with your loved ones. And I mean, if they're keen enough, or if they're, you know, connected enough, or communicative enough, or like, you know, have an open communication, right? That they have time to sort of have these important conversations before the disease process gets worse. You have time. In that period, you have time. It's sad for those who don't take that time to communicate the things that they wanted to communicate. And I've seen cases where that's happened too. And then there's some forms of dementia, or dementia where it's a sudden onset, like a TBI, and that's pretty devastating.
How would
So, in situations like that where, you know, like, I wonder if someone has like moderate to going towards advanced stages of dementia, I wonder whether or not those people still have like certain memories that are like flashes in their head, even though they may have like lost their verbal ability, their ability to communicate. I wonder if they have like these visual memories in their head, because I do have, there are some residents on my unit, on the dementia unit, who, I mean, I think of this one particular woman who goes through these episodes of crying, and I wonder what she's so sad about. That I would like to know what that is. She first came, she got there with her husband, actually, and her husband didn't have dementia. Actually, he had another neurological disorder. I won't be specific. He had another neurological disorder, and when they first came, they were on different units because she kept trying to feed him, and he couldn't have that diet because he would choke and aspirate. But they were on different units, unfortunately, and he would come up and visit. And so I wonder, though, like, he passed a couple of years ago. So I wonder if, like, when she has these episodes of crying, she knows something's wrong, or she misses him. But even if I knew that information,
right,
what would I really do with it?
It's more for you, really, I guess, or for the loved ones, trying to understand someone who's kind of locked in, like maybe understanding what's going on.
I could see it sort of being helpful if, like, let's say someone has that level of dementia where they can't really articulate things anymore, and they have a loved one that comes to visit and they're struggling, that you are able to sort of let them know that they love them, or that they're having these thoughts right now. That could be helpful. But I think for the most part, family members hold on to memories of the person's entire life and experiences with them, and that's what they can hold on to and understand, that they have loved them too in their life. So I'm not really quite sure what greater purpose it would serve.
I imagine it would be a highly specialized thing where you would need to extract, let's say, a specific piece of information, right, that was unavailable, or in order to get to the bottom of a traumatic event, like, let's say that, like, is a larger issue for, like, the whole family or something, and, like, that person has a key piece of information or something about that traumatic event that they might need to know. Like, I see it as being something where you hire that telepath to get at something specific that, you know, the family would need to know.
You mean like the code to a bank account in Switzerland?
I don't mean something like that. I'm sure people would hire telepaths for that reason, but I think it would be more like, I need to know if this happened to them, or who did this to them, or like things like that, like almost like a
For closure?
For closure, you know, for solving crimes or things like that that resulted in someone being unable to speak or whatever. Like, I see it being a very specialized technique, and that's not to say that we don't already have specialists who do things outside of, you know, who solve crimes and find missing people utilizing tools that are outside of the normal realm of doing things. It's very specialized. It's very, very specific in getting information that you could not get any other way. I think it would end up being something like that, like some kind of profession like that.
This question makes me think about the anime Psycho-Pass.
How?
I never finished it. Because
sad person. How could you admit that?
I know I never finished it.
That is awful. That is terrible.
I should see it to the end, huh?
Now we need to start a whole new project where you have to watch. Shame on you. Shame on you.
I watched halfway.
Oh.
But, you know,
I am leaving. I am disgusted with you.
Only because, like, in the beginning, they try to develop the criminal coefficient.
The crime coefficient, yeah.
The crime coefficient and
predictive AI technology to determine.
Okay, that's very different.
It is. That's what I'm saying. What are you talking about?
All right, cut that out.
I'm gonna cut that out.
All right, don't talk to me like this.
But yes, highly specialized.
I think, you know, with the trainings that with what we know of like dementia and Alzheimer's now, and like what we, the trainings that we do get and receive and the literature out there, we do know enough of how to sort of be more intuitive when we're working with these with residents with this illness. It's it's a very intuitive connection that you have with when you work with folks who have dementia. I think that's probably one of the reasons why I do enjoy it, honestly. And it's because I can intuitively kind of guess what their needs are. Whether it is, it's very basic too for them at that point. It's either food, water, snack, or connection. And for those that really don't know how to speak, because they've lost the verbal ability, it's these little moments and pockets of positivity you have with them, where they have like this moment where they see something that you saw, or you saw what they saw, and then you laugh together. Even if they would forget 5 minutes later, those moments are so important. Or if they had a moment where they had a memory, like for people who do know, who still have language ability intact, they'll give you a little piece of memory of, of where they lived in their life or what their hobby was. And you could have that brief conversation with them, or forever, as long as they're able to, and you just kind of go on for the ride. And that's how you get glimpses of their life as well, too. If I did have telepathic powers, though, when working with this population, it really, I think, would be for the family. Or I wonder how much clarity people have at different stages of dementia. So let's say even if you lost language ability, would you have like the capacity to still convey in telepathic form, or for the telepath to pick up a wish? Let's say if they had a moment of clarity, even if it was short, and then they thought to themselves, I don't want to live like this, and I really wish I had the option of euthanasia. like assisted suicide. And if you heard them say that, and even at the very sort of the tail end, you knew that that was their wish, it would be nice to fulfill it, because the rest of their lives with dementia is really, it's pretty sad.
Yeah,
the problem with that though is, well, you have, if a loved one, if someone did say and communicate that to you, oh, you know, I wish I had assisted suicide, you know, or I wish, you know, the option of euthanasia was still available for me, and you heard that in their voice. But I'm the one who heard it, and then I tell it to someone, like, where's the liability?
Well, yes, but at that point, you know, the telepaths would be their license, they would be the end-all authority. It's just like, you know, like with Talia, like when they're doing a deal or something, they're like, oh, do we have a deal? And she'll be like, yes, he's telling the truth. Like, at that point, the telepath, they are 100% the end word on whatever it is, right?
Right, but in this situation,
but I think that would be the case. If this was like a practical thing, if you heard that and you said that, that would be 100% the truth. Like, there would be no question.
Yeah, but then there are also the possibility of corrupt telepaths.
Sort of. Supposedly, yes.
And also
corrupt telepaths, or telepaths who would say,
I mean, we have people in medicine who try to kill people.
Sure. There's always room for corruption. So yeah, it would be hard to say.
Right. So I don't know if I would want to be in that position either. That opens up a lot of room for a lot of different things. Yeah. So
good question.
It was a great question. It gave me something to think about and imagine. I haven't been creative in a very long time. I realize the way I speak is very regressed. The way I write is very regressed, and my mind is not as imaginative as it used to be. So I really appreciate the question. It gave me a moment to really think about something that was outside of what I would typically think about. So thank you for that, Mike.